this alien invasion will be if this is true, and by the way, it might be, this will be the least believable thing that has ever happened. This will be a joke. If they try to do this, this will be the most embarrassing event of our time. That might end the world. Forget the fucking aliens. This ham-fisted attempt to induce some type of global event and stage a fake alien invasion, which, by the way, I could totally see these idiots doing. The way they do it and how poorly this is done will be the most shameful exercise in the history of the government lying to us. If they do this, there is zero way this is done with any success. This will be the biggest. I mean, you're gonna see this, and you're gonna be smoking a joint with your friends, laughing. The government has spent the last week telling you there are underground alien bases in the ocean, maybe in the center of the earth. The response has been pretty muted from the public. Nobody cares that much. So we're being observed by a higher race of interdimensional. People do not care. I kind of love that. Again, what's the actionable? What's some guy is supposed to do when he's sitting in a Panda Express? Now that he knows that higher intelligence has been observing him at the Panda Express, I'm telling you right now, nobody cares. This is like the biggest event. This level of news and the reception it's getting are so far apart. Because this should be, in any sane society, this should be a very big deal. But I don't think anyone cares anymore. If they stage a fake alien invasion, it's to put everyone, it's martial law, and they know everyone's not going to get unified, Greer said, where they're just trying to, everybody's going to fall in line quick. But make no mistake, that invasion will not be believable. It will be like watching a bad school play. It will be a horror. And you will watch it and go, I don't believe any of this. I think it's fake. And you'll look at your wife and go, I think it's fake, but they're probably going to put us in camp soon. That's what your wife will say. She'll be smoking a butt because everyone's smoking now. And she'll look at you and go, this is probably fake. And you'll go, yup. And you'll go, but I think they're going to put us in camp soon. I think that's what this is. Because it's going to look like the shitty opening ceremony of the Olympics. That's what it's going to look. If they do a fake alien invasion, it's going to be like Cirque du Soleil, because it's going to be so over the top and ridiculous. And just know that if you're watching it, I'll be watching it with you. I'll be watching it from my home. You'll be watching it from yours. Just know that we'll be in camps. Maybe I wouldn't have been in a camp, but I opened my fat mouth and insulted everyone in this fucking administration. But so now I'll be in a camp now too. So just know that we're all going to be in camps if there's a fake alien. If there's no unifying moment and no one believes that there.
Good morning. My name is Carol Rosin. In 1974, after being a sixth grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Wernher von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space. And I said, teachers don't stop until June. He said, no, you have to understand. This is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies, he said, against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system, the first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids. And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapons system, and they're all lies. This is a system, he told me, that would never protect anyone. Even back then, he talked about suitcase bombs. He talked about chemical, viral, bacterial, biological warfare, that these space-based weapons would never protect us against. And then he told me that, in fact, if you travel around the world, which I did after he died in 1977, I met with people in over 100 countries who were friends. They didn't want to build space-based weapons. I became a space and missile defense consultant, and I worked with people around the world. I became an advisor to the People's Republic of China. They don't want to build a space-based weapons system. And he told me back then that they didn't. He said, go to Russia. They're considered to be the enemy. I got on a plane by myself. When I got to Russia, I had a list of people that I had read out of the newspaper. Chernenko was in office then. He was the only one I didn't get a chance to meet. They introduced me to everyone when I got there. And when I got back, I said, oh my Lord, this man is telling the truth. There is no threat. And I've been waiting until this day for 27 years, and I'm expecting the spin to happen, because he also explained to me that as a military strategist, as a person who worked on the MX missile, which I did later, he said, you will find that there is going to be a spin to find some enemy against whom we have to build space-based weapons. And now we should expect the spin, because he said part of the formula for the intelligence community is if they might have a weapon, then we have to consider that they do have these weapons. So now they do have these weapons, so now we have to build these weapons systems. And that's the formula, except that it's all based on a lie. And we have witnesses here today that have shown you that these extraterrestrial beings, that these craft that have come here are now not UFOs, they're identified flying objects, and we know that they have beings in them. And we have witnesses here who have told you that they can shut down our missile silos, they can stop a rocket going into space that's a test. We have witnesses here who have worked in the classified departments, who have the courage to come forward here to support what Wernher von Braun told me back in 1974 to 77. And I will testify before the Congress that when I founded the Institute for Security and Cooperation in Outer Space, which I shut down a few years ago because I didn't believe we had a chance with this huge, integrated around the world, complex weapon system, that we had any chance at all of transforming that war industry into a space industry that could provide benefits, like Dr. Greer has said, of global warming. We can end that situation of that problem. We can end the energy crisis. We can build now non-polluting technologies. Wernher von Braun used to tell me that we could have cars back then that drove around off the ground. He described this to me on beams so that we have no pollution on this planet. And we can solve the problems of the people that are urgent and potential, and the other animals and the other cultures on Earth and in space. And we can end the arms race without dislocating the industry jobs, without disrupting the economy, by transforming, Wernher von Braun told me, the war industry into a global cooperative space industry that will provide, he said, finally, more jobs and profits on this planet than during any hot or cold wartime, more products and services that can be applied directly to solving the problems of this planet. And we can have a whole planet now that lives in peace on Earth, with all the cultures on Earth and with all the extraterrestrial cultures in space. And these are words that Wernher von Braun told me in 1974, and I will testify before the Congress under oath about everything I have said and more. Thank you.
Braun was dying of cancer. He asked me to be his spokesperson, to appear on occasions when he was too ill to speak. And I did. And what he asked me to do was to educate decision makers and the public about why we shouldn't be putting weapons in space, why they're a dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, untestable, unworkable idea, and what the alternatives are, how we could be building a cooperative space system. What was most interesting to me was a repetitive sentence that he said to me over and over again during the approximately 4 years that I had the opportunity of working with him, and that was the strategy that was being used to educate the public and decision makers, and the scare tactics, the spin that was being put on a weapons system. And that was how we identify an enemy. The enemy, at first he said, the enemy against whom we're going to build a space-based weapons system that he thought was a ridiculous idea, unnecessary and very dangerous, not to mention too costly, etc. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie. So when I hear that there's a possible threat of extraterrestrials, and I look at the history of thousands of years of possible visitations, recorded history, and when I hear now the stories of the disclosures of honest military intelligence industry people who have had experiences with UFOs, with crashes and landings, with live or dead bodies of extraterrestrial beings, people from out in the universes. And if I'm ever told that these are enemies against whom we have to build space-based weapon systems, based on my own personal experience of having worked in the military-industrial complex on weapon systems and military strategy, I'm going to know it's a lie. It's a lie. And I'm not only not going to believe it, but I'm going to go out as loudly as I can and tell everyone to take a look. They have not taken us away yet. We're still here after thousands of years of visits. If in fact they're still visiting us now and people are working with ETs, live or dead, if they're taking photographs, if they're experiencing all kinds of UFO experiences, then we have to look at this as something that is not a hostile occurrence. It would be my guess, based on my own experience of having traveled to countries whom we've been told had hostile intentions against the United States, it would be my hope and my intention to do everything I could to work with people who are working to communicate with and cooperate with these extraterrestrial beings, because they're clearly not hostile.
The highlights from NASA's press conference regarding UFOs. No matter what your feelings are on this topic, this is a major moment in our history where our government and NASA, for the first time ever, are acknowledging UFOs, UAPs, with a serious approach. Keep in mind, most of these people are scientists, so they talk like scientists. And everything that they said comes from a scientific perspective. And after 4 hours of that, it's definitely what we got. This guy, Dan Evans, who works for NASA, claims that NASA is going to be fully transparent with the public. Dr. Kirkpatrick's testimony, he said that we have observed objects in the air that we do not understand. These objects behave with characteristics that are difficult to explain, and we have not been able to identify what these objects are. Kirkpatrick explained that many of the UAPs and UFOs have been identified, from being an aircraft to a bird or a weather balloon, but the percentage of ones they haven't been able to identify are ones that we need to focus on. Mike Free with the FAA was saying that any UAP reports from their pilots are taken seriously and will be handed over to NASA. And with our whistleblower protection program now in place for military service pilots, those individuals who have experienced UAPs or experience UAPs will be able to come forward and share their stories as well. And none of the current data surrounding the UAPs that have been documented suggest that they're extraterrestrial. Over 800 UAP reports that they are looking through. Most of them are classified, some of them that are declassified. The ones that are classified will eventually be released to the public, but it's not until they have enough data to give more of an understanding of that footage for the public to know what they're looking at. They actually gave an explanation as to why some of the quality looks poor. And that's because we do have access to technology that can look at a UAP or UFO when it's first reported. Unfortunately, we have privacy laws in this country that prevent us from being able to use those sensors to look at those UFOs, because let's say they're in your backyard, that's where it gets a little dicey. Even offered up the idea, if you're an app developer, consider this, where if we had an app that could interact with our phone's cameras, because our cameras on our phones now have been upgraded so much so that if there was a reading for the sensors being used when they are filming UAPs or UFOs and then sending them in to NASA, they have more data to go along with the recordings. Outside of those main points, it was a lot of science jargon, honestly. Just went over many topics of how they're going to address collecting the data, the sensors, and all of the stuff involved for the scientific method. But we need to be on the lookout for the end of July when they're going to release a more in-depth report, and hopefully we'll see some more of those classified videos.
Hello, I'm Carol Rosin, and I'm in Arizona right now at the 20th anniversary of the Disclosure Project, where I was a witness in Washington, D.C. in May 2001. At that event, I spoke for Wernher von Braun. I gave his warning to the world that there was going to be a faked alien invasion. He called it the last card that would be played in the entire war game, which has scenarios of formulas for wars, enemies, sanctions, fighting, killing, leapfrogging the technology. Von Braun, the father of rocketry, when I became the first woman executive in that aerospace industry, Von Braun taught me and gave me his deathbed assignment to prevent the placement of weapons in outer space. So I came here to give a reminder about that warning of Wernher von Braun, that the last card is being played right now. You're seeing it in the media. You're seeing faked pictures. You can't tell whether a UFO is a real one or not. They're not even UFOs, they're identified. Dr. Greer is explaining at this event that there are so many that are man-made. It's the old game of having to have the next enemy, so that you have an enemy that you can keep building the war game against, keep that economy going, and dominate and control the entire space around all of us. And I know some of you, if you're aware of it, are noticing that we're being controlled right on this planet in so many different ways. Wernher von Braun wanted to open that up. He worked under Hitler. He actually learned that from experience we can use the technology for the good or for war, and we will never, ever be safe if we escalate the arms race into that place above all of our heads. In the United States where I live, there's a huge momentum to close off even access to space without permission, without the United States and allies dominating and controlling space. So there's an enemy mentality. Well, I could go on with that scenario for a long time and explain it further, but I think most of you listening to this know what I'm talking about. The problem is we don't see a way out of it if we're looking for earthbound solutions, which leads me to then talking about the treaty that was introduced by Russia and China decades ago. It's been called for over and over again. It's been updated in 2008, 2014. It's now ready to be signed into a binding world law, and that's all we need to get done. But how do we get that done? Do we have a peace president? Since we have in the United States been at war for 93% of our time since 1776, when this country was formed. We don't have a peace president. And I'm calling on the leaders of the world right now, as are some of the people who put together over 100 of them who are now committed to not be the first to place weapons in outer space, on now finding a leader who will put them together to sign this treaty, send it to the United Nations Secretary General, who will then announce that we have a binding world law
to prevent the placement of weapons in outer space. This treaty exists. It's on my website, peaceinspace.com, that's been put together by experts all over the world. If you look down the news section, you'll see some of these experts, many from Russia and China. And I also have that same information multiplied over with including 700 plus videos of speeches from the Ziegel's readings that have been put together by Professor Alexander Simonov in Russia. Hundreds of people coming twice a year to Russia to give their talks about different issue areas that have solutions, but that now are suffering with extreme problems. And I've met so many people in Russia, in the office of the president. Vladimir Ermakov, who speaks English, came to me last time in December 2019 when I was there and whispered in my ear, you know, Carol, we had the same conversation 35 years ago. The only difference is that now I have grandchildren. Well, I haven't had children. I have 400 million orphans, however. I see hundreds of species disappearing every week. I see earth changes that are so dangerous and people are suffering all over the world. And are we prepared? Well, the theme of the war game is prepare for war, prepare to win. I say that the Space Force, the Space Forces have a new role to play. They need to be a force, but a force now to solve these urgent problems. They have the technology in the military, industrial, lab, university, intelligence community, NASA, and other international space and defense agencies and intelligence community to use the technologies and our highest consciousness to solve these problems. But we need to do it fast because the extinction process is well underway and it's in an accelerated motion. So I'm leaving you with the thought that we can have peace on Earth if we can maintain it in outer space, invite our neighbors in, get to know that that is a reality. We are not alone and there is no hostility. There are no neighbors that are hostile or threats from space. We're all together as one family. That's not rhetoric, it's the truth, but it extends into outer space. And now we have a tool, this treaty, that you'll read on peaceinspace.com and support, call on the leaders. I'm calling on President Putin right now to lead the way and become our first planetary peace president. And may peace prevail in space so that we can have peace on Earth. Thank you.
J. Bennett Johnson then showed me through his office at General Dynamics a then top secret stealth. Here was this triangular stealth that wasn't in any of the school books, wasn't being talked about anywhere, wasn't out in the newspapers or anything else. It was being withheld. It was still a top secret weapon system. But I saw this triangular stealth. It looked like a spaceship to me. I'd never seen anything like that. And everything that J. Bennett Johnson was doing and he was involved in certainly was alien to me. So it was easy for me to accept the idea that what was happening was in fact being perpetrated by aliens. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as aliens. That would be foolish of me to even say anything like that at all. But what I am saying is that it was my experience that these were claiming to be aliens. If there's a reality out there pertaining to any alien influence, we need to sort out the government misinformation and disinformation and mind manipulation techniques that they're using. I know for a fact that the plan is to make all of us feel totally helpless, that what's happening is beyond our realm to affect because we've been taken over by aliens, that our Independence Day is dawning. So beware of that. Understand that those criminals have been keeping information and technology from us under their blanket of national security. They are 25 years ahead of us at least, technologically. Can you imagine what they've got now? 25 years ahead? What's happened that you're aware of in the last 25 years? Microwave ovens, we've got computerization, and they've had access to all of that to continue their own advancements. They're way ahead. So when they say, it's aliens, and they show us some incredible technology, don't fall into the trap of feeling totally helpless, that this is beyond our realm to affect. Superstition begins where knowledge leaves off. And they have been keeping knowledge from us for a long time. People have all kinds of belief systems. And I'm sure each and every one of you has various and different belief systems as well. Regardless of what your belief system is, it is imperative that you know that these criminals are people. They are within our realm to affect. They need to be held accountable for their actions and their crimes against humanity.
Made anything which would not have to be considered closed. So I don't want you to answer what they've said necessarily.
Allies have seen these. China has established its own version of a UAP task force, so clearly a number of countries have observations of things in the airspace that they can identify.
And do we share data with some, with all? Are they sharing with us?
We share data with some, and some share data with us.
But not necessarily all that have publicly reported something?
That's correct.
Okay. And I think that's an important thing, and for the other session, actually, that we don't discuss that now. Because, you know, obviously something like this can be a national security challenge for us, and no doubt about it. If they're developed by an adversary through some breakthrough technology, they can be very disruptive to our military actions, or at least serve as a distraction. So my caution would be careful who we share our data with, and don't necessarily trust some of the data we may get from someone else. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the objectives of this open hearing is to try to erode some of the stigma that attaches to, in particular, our military men and women reporting this. It's obviously really very serious because should one of our adversaries have developed a technology that we don't know about it, we need to know about it yesterday. And obviously, any sort of stigma that prevents our military from reporting this data as comprehensively as possible is a national security threat. So I really just have two questions in the service of that goal. The first is, the chairman asked that we run that video again. Most people, when they see a video, we're all used to seeing things from a car, seeing things from a sidewalk. Very few people have the experience of observing something.
The first thing I think that's important to note about this is there are lots of things when you are moving very fast and an object is between you and a stationary reference point like the ground. It gives a lot of different impressions about how quickly something is or isn't moving. And it actually means that it is a challenge, especially with narrative-based data, to get a lot of information on that. That's why the sensor data is so important, because things do happen very quickly, as you see there. And sometimes things that happen very quickly, something may be moving very slow. That aircraft is moving quite fast. How fast that object is moving that goes by is probably very slow.
So I guess my point is that an observation
know where the giant asteroid that's heading towards Earth might actually hit. For those of you that don't know, there's an asteroid that's on path to hitting planet Earth in the year 2032. It's about 300 feet wide and it can easily destroy a city. And if you don't believe me, just look it up for yourself. So the lucky country that will most likely be hit by this massive asteroid called YR24 is the UK. There's a few different places in the UK that it will most likely hit, and we have a little chart here to help us understand a little bit better about what the impact damage will be. So if you're in the red zone, then you're pretty much done for. Orange, you're also pretty much done for. Honestly, if you're in the green even, you're done for. Let's get real. The only place that you're not even still safe is going to be the yellow area, where you're still probably going to get glass in your eye. Here's a list of the cities that could be hit in the UK. We got Nottingham, Birmingham, Manchester, Cardiff. I've actually never even heard of that. Maybe it should hit that one. Edinburgh. Oh, and London, bro. Well, now you know. If you're living in any of these cities now, you have a few years to get the hell out of there. Let me know what you guys think about this.
You don't find that suspicious? You don't find that suspicious? You don't find that suspicious?
So this is a real nerve center for the U.S. government.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
like one of the big ones.
It is
in the country.
Yes.
Okay, so does a V2 look like this?
It's much smaller.
And so your grandfather, who worked on the V2,
yes,
You were telling me that it stood for something. In German, what did it mean?
The V stood for Vergeltungswaffen, which means revenge weapon.
And the Germans were firing the V2 at the end of the war, right? Into the UK?
Into the UK.
Into Belgium?
Into Belgium, en masse, yes. Into the UK. And as he told me that the largest challenge they had with that missile was guidance systems.
Okay.
Because they didn't have, there were no satellites and no GPSs. They used gyroscopes. So they had to be situated properly on the terrain, aimed properly, and then the gyros had to be calibrated properly, and then they launched them, and they went off on their own. And they were basically an area weapon, not a precision strike weapon.
Okay, but it was technology the West didn't have and the Soviets didn't have.
That is correct.
It was far ahead of everything else.
They were using, I understand the Russians had multiple launch rocket systems that were on portable tracked vehicles that would launch in the battlefield.
Okay.
Limited range, but they were, these V2s had the capability to go, over to the English mainland and into that area too. And so the goal was always to develop a delivery platform for some payload to go further and with more accuracy, which they were actually working on when the war ended. They were developing a multi-stage intercontinental ballistic missile.
Why were the Germans so far ahead?
Well, I just think that they have a unique, intricate interest, and their minds seem to be tuned to work towards, a high technology solution to a hobby, because rocketry was a hobby back in those days, even in the United States.
A hobby?
Yes.
What, like your little model rockets?
Yes.
As kids?
Yes, they were here too, but not to the degree of perfection that the Germans were working on.
Mm. Theo, you're very strict about the camera out here, so keep it down, down, down until we go to these tourist sites.
Yeah. Imagine you're a tourist in a tourist bus. They'll tell you can come and take pictures when we get out of the bus. They don't want you filming the buildings.
Nothing over there.
And the building numbers. You see, that identifies a location. I mean, for obvious reasons.
Right.
Rocket Park. These were rockets that were developed here. Now, the one on the left looks like a V2, but it's not. I think
that smaller one there?
Yeah, that's the Hermes missile.
So this is a new world for me. Where am I wrong here? Where am I right? The NASA was mostly German engineers in the beginning?
Well, I want to thank you all for being here for this important announcement. 7 years in the making. As you know, this has been going on for a long period of time, and I am thrilled to report that the U.S. Space Command headquarters will move to the beautiful locale of a place called Huntsville, Alabama, forever to be known from this point forward as Rocket City. This will result in more than 30,000 Alabama jobs, and probably much more than that, and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, and that's billions, because it can't be millions, it's billions and billions of dollars. Most importantly, this decision will help America defend and dominate the high frontier, as they call it.
I watched Amy Eskridge's 3-hour last interview so that you don't have to. This is what happened. A 34-year-old anti-gravity scientist sent a text that said, "I would not unalive myself." A month later, she was found unalived with a single pew-pew to the head. A few years before this happened, she sat down for a 3-hour interview. I watched the entire thing so that you don't have to. The FBI is now investigating 11 scientists' unalivings, and I believe that number is now up to 13. Even Trump has called it pretty serious stuff. Even a Republican congressman named Eric Burleson said that there was significant evidence that Amy had been targeted by a directed energy weapon. Quick disclaimer before we get into it, this video is a skit. It's a creative summary of a long interview. Nothing that I say should be taken as a statement of fact. Do your own research. I'm walking you through what somebody else said in their own interview. Make of it what you will. So who was she? Amy Eskridge was a plasma physicist working on anti-gravity propulsion in Huntsville, Alabama. Her father was a former NASA engineer working at the Marshall Space Flight Center. Amy co-founded a research outfit called the Institute for Exotic Science. A month before she was found unalived, she sent a text message to a former British intelligence officer saying, "If you see any report that I unalived myself, I most certainly did not." She had photographs of burn marks on her hands that a colleague with some sort of weapons experience identified as coming from potentially an RF K-band emitter. It's important to understand where Amy lived because I think that sheds some light on the story. She said, and quoting her directly, that Huntsville, Alabama is the biggest fucking deal that you have never heard of. Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government national security tech, intel community tech, and aerospace tech. Huntsville is number 3 on the first strike list. So in the event of a nuclear first strike, Huntsville is in the top 3 targets that would be hit. Now, early in the interview, Amy explains why she went public in the first place. She started this research institute because, in her own words, if you stick your neck out in public, at least someone will notice if it gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, they will bury you. They will burn your house down with you still in it, and it won't even make the news. So kind of an ominous prediction considering what happened. Now, Amy talks about something throughout the interview called the Secret Space Program. She refers to it as the SSP. Early in the interview, she pulls out what she calls her intel notebook and she defines it. According to her, the SSP is the Navy, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing. But I would imagine it probably extends to other prime defense contractors as well. But those are just the institutions. The actual claim is that what's being run through them is essentially a parallel program that is decades, if not centuries, ahead of what is publicly known. And that's including even the most highly classified special access programs. Essentially technology that defies the laws of physics as we understand them. Now, I did some research, and the historical version of this claim says that human aerospace research essentially bifurcated somewhere between the late 1800s and World War II. Now, there's a public branch that gave us NASA and the F-22, and there is a parallel branch going back to the Sonora Aero Club in the 1850s in California, the Nazi Bell in World War II, and through Operation Paperclip all the way into Huntsville, Alabama. And even Bob Lazar, if you're familiar with that name, has made a similar version of this claim going back to 1989. David Grush testified to it under oath to Congress back in 2023, but Amy named 4 institutions from her notebook 2 years before Grush even testified. So that's what she's talking about when she says the SSP. It's a parallel technological civilization operating inside the U.S. that uses the military and prime defense contractors in secret. Now, Amy was not a fringe outsider kind of stumbling into this world. She was actually born into it. After World War II, the United States ran an operation called Paperclip, where we imported the bad German rocket scientists, including Wernher von Braun. We put them to work in Huntsville, Alabama, building rockets that essentially became the American space program. Here's how Amy explains her own lineage. Paperclip 1.0 was von Braun and his peers, the original German scientist. Paperclip 2.0 was the scientists trained by von Braun and his peers, including Amy's father, who worked as the technical lead at the Advanced Propulsion Lab at NASA, Marshall. Paperclip 3.0 are the millennials who were trained by the people who were trained by von Braun. So she claims that she is the third iteration of Paperclip, basically. She was a third-generation scientist coming straight out of the naughty German rocket program, working on anti-gravity in the same town that the original Paperclip scientists were brought to after the war. This video is getting long, so I'll probably have to make a part 2, but I'll just end on this. Amy spends a long stretch of the interview talking about a man named Martin Tajmar. Tajmar is a scientist who works on anti-gravity research in a lab in Germany. According to Amy, his lab is the best funded, best equipped anti-gravity research lab on Earth. He's funded by the German Air Force. He has a fleet of German grad students. He has the best money, the best equipment, but he only ever publishes null results. Nothing ever seems to work. They try, they can't replicate results, or they'll get no effect. Just over and over, nothing works. And Amy's claim is that Tajmar's actual job is to publish null results. Because if the best funded, best equipped research lab on the planet keeps finding no results, then the rest of academia just gives up on the field altogether. The science gets buried by a paid researcher publishing the appearance of failure.
Disclosure is going to come out of Huntsville, Alabama, out of Redstone Arsenal. Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama is the biggest fucking deal that you've never heard of. It's the biggest fucking deal that you have never heard of. Because the fact is that we have deep and wide, extensive credibility that no one knows about, because you're not supposed to know about it. Because it's in Alabama, it's obscure. You're not supposed to know about it. That's the point.
People that don't know what Huntsville is. Amy
People know what Huntsville is? Is that what you're saying? People don't know what Huntsville is. Huntsville is the biggest fucking deal on the planet that you have never heard of. No, like, Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government national security technology and intelligence community technology and aerospace technology. Huntsville is like the hub. Like, we are number 3 on the First Strike launch list. If First Strike happens, 3 targets, Huntsville will be one of them. Alabama. This is Alabama, dude, in the deep south. We're in the top 3 First Strike. We're in the top 3 First Strike because you haven't heard of us. That's why. It's on purpose. I started the Institute for one reason. One reason, the Institute. I started it as a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology through, because I told Mark this. If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, fuck you. They will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news.
Damn. 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 Damn.
Operation Paperclip, one of the most controversial U.S. programs in history. After World War II, America secretly brought over 1,600 Nazi scientists, engineers, and doctors to work for the U.S. government. First, one of the most famous recruits, Wernher von Braun, the mastermind behind NASA's Saturn V rocket. Yep, the guy who helped put Americans on the moon first built rockets for Hitler. Second, many of these scientists had direct ties to war crimes, but the U.S. scrubbed their records to make them hireable. Some were even given new identities.
Operation Paperclip.
Come see the Vaun, Alabama weather. Come try the BBQ. Come see life free from the guilt.
Come see all our new white friends.
Come to Huntsville, Alabama, home of the Space and Rocket Center. Staffed by Nazi scientists smuggled here by your government. Oh yeah, it really happened. Huntsville, Alabama. It's some fucked up shit. But hey, we got to the moon.
So, your history teacher never taught you about Operation Paperclip, but that's okay, because Valenti Videos is going to tell you all about it real quickly. You see, right after World War II, there was a little thing called the Nuremberg trials, where a whole lot of these Germans were going to answer for their crimes. However, before it started, the United States began Operation Paperclip, where we started to take a whole bunch of these German scientists and bring them over to the United States so that they didn't have to answer for their crimes. You see, the Russians started scooping up a whole bunch of them right after the war ended, and then we decided, you know what, we ought to do the same thing, considering we're about to enter a new age where we're competing against the Soviet Union for global supremacy. So we scoop up a whole bunch of these German scientists. One of them is Wernher von Braun, who was the head of NASA. He was also a real rat bastard. You can look up the shit that he did. However, we smuggled all these German scientists into the United States, but they needed new names. They needed new records. We had to relocate them to the South so that they could make good friends. And, the only thing that was supposed to be left over from their old paperwork with their real names and their real history was the paperclip mark, the little imprint that the paperclip would leave behind when you put the new file on top of the old file, hence the name Operation Paperclip.
It's pretty much the high point of the American empire.
Hi folks, I really appreciate Dr. Roy Casagrande and what he does. He teaches political science at Austin Community College. I think that's where he still is, and I really wish that he was on TikTok. But what this illustrates is a really important point about why historians are needed to provide some context for a couple of these issues. And this is a really important issue when we're talking about American exceptionalism, when we're talking about these kind of blinders that people put on when they look back at American accomplishments and American achievements. We can see that happening in this video. And this is not to criticize Dr. Casagrande. This is really just to go ahead and make sure that we're providing some added layer of context to this because it matters. His main point is really about the scientific achievements that we haven't accomplished anything like we accomplished with going to the moon. And that the core part of going to the moon is the Saturn V rocket. This is what he says. And that it's American achievement that does that. The problem is that that's not what happens. And if we're going to have an honest 250th, we need to be honest about it all. I'm not saying he's being dishonest. I'm just saying he's being complete. That we need to sort of add on to it. That it's not Americans. Just like it's not the French the Americans who win the American Revolution, it's the French. It's not the Americans who get us to the moon. It's the Nazis. And this is a part of history that a lot of people don't talk about, but we need to talk more about. There are a couple of small documentaries, small pieces about it, but why this has not been a part of anything broader, I don't get. You can watch Apollo 13 all you want, but at the very end of celebrating the space race, we have to understand that this is the product of Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was the decision by the United States government to rescue as many Nazi scientists as possible at the end of the European phase of World War II, to make sure that they are not falling into Soviet hands and that they were able to assist American growth during the Cold War. Take a look at Operation Paperclip. Take a look at the almost 2,000 scientists, between 1,000 and 2,000 Nazi scientists they bring over. We're not just talking about scientists who end up working for the Nazis. We're talking about people from Wernher von Braun on down who are members of the SS, who are directly complicit in concentration camp atrocities, in working concentration camp prisoners to death in order to achieve their goals for the Nazi rocket program. The United States doesn't achieve anything with their rocket program. They don't achieve anything in terms of the science that's required to provide for the healthcare of getting men to the moon. Science health becomes a whole new thing. Why? Because of all of the Nazi scientists brought over. And so we're not just talking about people who happen to be Germans and they wanted to go ahead and continue their work, so they ended up working for the Nazis. We're talking card-carrying members, full-on board members of the Nazi Party, who were part of the SS, who were part of the party, who were signed on to the Nazi project, who happened to benefit from the fact that the Americans wanted them to go ahead and jumpstart the American rocket program, which turned into the American space program. And it's not just the guys at the top like von Braun. It is more than 1,000 scientists, between 1,000 and 2,000 scientists. Were a couple of them identified by the Department of Justice as being war criminals? Yeah, but long after they retired from active service at NASA and in other parts of the US government. Long after. And we're talking about a handful of them who were kicked out of the United States, sent back to Germany, long after that their active use to the United States space, rocket and space program. So whenever we think about celebrating us getting to the moon as being part of a great American achievement, we have to again engage in some honest history here and know that America never would have done that if there wasn't a swastika behind that effort.
Look at it this way. You can't have a war called the War Against Evil, that's the other name for WW2, and then keep some of that evil after you win. That means evil won. Do you understand that? Like, that's a trope in a lot of media where, like, they vanquish the big bad foe, and then right before the credits cut, a little bit of that foe slinks off, and then, of course, lo and behold, it comes back even stronger. And as far as discoveries go, the math ain't changing. That'll be discovered in 10, 20 years tops. I would much rather have to wait a couple decades to, get the math back, as long as it means I don't have evil demons literally in the government and propagating. But if we didn't have that science, we wouldn't have been able to overtake Russia in the space race. Because communism's the big bad evil guy, even though they probably did more than America did in the war to win, but that's a whole other story. And at the end of the day, the bad guys from World War II made all their shit after, like, us. They did the big laurels and eagles and fucking Jim Crow-like laws. Like, come on, dude. Why do you think America had that thing at Madison Square Garden where they, let them do their thing? And then why did America stay out of it for so long?
But I still don't believe it.
What's it going to take to make you a believer?
Well, I like to see it up there, but I ain't going up there to find out.
Did you think this would ever happen?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
I don't believe if God meant for them to be up there, he would have had some up there first. So that's when I still don't believe that they're up there. I see it, but they could be landing anywhere. Honestly, I just don't have that belief they're up there.
Well, for a moment, let's assume that they are, presume they are. What does man on the moon mean to you?
What does it mean to me? They don't mean anything to me because I don't know the meaning, what they want to go up there for. If I know the meaning, what they want to go up there for, then I could sort of understand why I'd be up there.
Poem said, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon, and her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. You know the man just upped my rent last night? Because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, and no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. I wonder why he's upping me. Because Whitey's on the moon? I was already giving him $50 a week, and now Whitey's on the moon. Taxes taking my whole damn check. The junkies make me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And as if all that crap wasn't enough, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. Was all that money I made last year for Whitey on the moon? How come I ain't got no money here?
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know, but I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and that's the way it happened. And if it didn't happen, it's nice to know why it didn't happen, so in the future, if we want to keep doing something, we need to know why something stopped in the past that we wanted to keep it going.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again. I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
Commissioners, today I'd like to bring to your attention a potential fraud on an enormous scale happening in your county. There's now clear evidence of NASA using numerous methods to grossly mislead the public about astronauts being on the International Space Station. During interior ISS scenes from NASA's own live feed, the use of wires, harnesses, green screens, and virtual reality have been detected to achieve the appearance of a weightless environment. Examples of this include astronauts fading in and out of the screen, green screen glitches, grabbing objects that aren't really there, pulling on invisible wires, getting tangled in their harnesses, and even astronauts appearing out of thin air. This begs the obvious question. If they're really up there, why are they using Hollywood techniques to fake the footage? Now, unfortunately, I can't show you these clips in here today, but I will be sending them to you. Outside the International Space Station, during spacewalks, air bubbles have been recorded on numerous occasions. How is it possible for air bubbles to be present in the vacuum of space? I once questioned astronaut Scott Kelly about this phenomenon. His body language and answers only created more questions. In 2013, astronaut Luca Parmitano nearly drowned during a spacewalk when his helmet filled with water. This happened again just last year. Air bubbles, helmets filling with water, and drowning. Are they in space or are they underwater? Now, what's really interesting is that they trained for spacewalks in an underwater pool with a complete ISS replica. Now, surely they aren't filming these spacewalks in an underwater pool and then editing them to appear if they're in space, because that sure would be something, wouldn't it? I'm calling on the Brevard County Commissioners to open a full investigation into NASA's fraudulent practices and use of taxpayer dollars. It costs NASA $3 billion per year to operate the ISS, and if they don't have a darn good explanation as to why they're faking these videos, I and the public would like a darn good explanation as to where our tax money is going. And if they are indeed faking the funk, it is our duty to expose and eliminate this fraudulent and astronomically wasteful ISS program. And look, I know what you're all thinking. The NASA is part of the federal government, and you're just county commissioners. Even if what I'm saying is true, what can you do? But let me remind you, not only is this happening in your county, as public officials, you have the platform and the ability to make a statement or hold a press conference, alerting the public, state, and federal authorities to investigate further. You have the power to start the conversation. Video evidence of everything I described today will be emailed to you all, and I truly hope we can get to the bottom of this. I look forward to the day that $3 billion annual budget is put towards our veterans, our homeless, maybe some of that mental health stuff the young lady just spoke about, and the revitalization of Brevard County.
How? Hold on, bro. How? I'm saying, talk to me, bro.
Weaponizing space is a super interesting topic.
Let's go there.
Yeah. So the couple things. So just recently, Russia announced that it's going to pull out of the START treaty. Right.
What is the START treaty?
The START treaty was a treaty that was put in place during the Obama years to basically limit and downsize the total number of nuclear weapons that existed between the United States and the Russian arsenals. So a downsizing and modernization and safety protocols, right, for our two different nuclear weapon arsenals. I mean, it was set to expire in 2025. So the treaty basically says you cannot put a weapon into orbit around Earth. The non-weaponization of space is a treaty that's existed since the 70s. Nuclear weapons actually work the way they work specifically because they're supposed to fit within the guidelines of a treaty. So the treaty basically says you cannot put a weapon into orbit around Earth. Nuclear weapons follow that rule because they actually launch in a elliptical pattern to re-engage or re-enter Earth's atmosphere. So they leave from one part of Earth and they enter another part of Earth. They do not make a full rotation around the Earth. So they do not make an orbit. With the idea of weaponizing space, it becomes scary because now there are so many more people involved that were never part of that treaty. China's putting things in space. They were never part of the original treaty. We've got commercial entities putting things in space, right?
Meanwhile, in space, Moscow and Beijing have turned a once peaceful arena into a warfighting domain. They have weaponized space through killer satellites, directed energy weapons, and more in an effort to exploit our systems and chip away at our military advantage.
You're a liar. You're a liar. You're a liar.
U.S. officials tell CBS News that intelligence confirms Russia is developing a nuclear-capable weapon that could destroy U.S. satellites in space. 1 week ago today, Russia launched a rocket carrying a top-secret satellite, a sign its efforts to develop a space weapon are intensifying. Willie James Inman has the latest.
There is no immediate threat to anyone's safety.
National Security spokesman John Kirby said Thursday that the U.S. has been aware of Russia's pursuit of weapons technology in space for months. If developed and deployed, the weapon would be a violation of the Outer Space Treaty that Russia signed, which forbids the release of weapons of mass destruction in space. According to U.S. intelligence, the weapon would be capable of destroying U.S. satellites, shutting down communication, surveillance programs, and possibly impacting military command operations.
We believe that it was important enough to notify the other members of Congress.
Ohio Republican Mike Turner called it a serious national security threat. The chair of the House Intelligence Committee initially made the intelligence public Wednesday in a cryptic statement, a move the White House disagreed with.
We make decisions about how and when to publicly disclose intelligence in a careful, deliberate, and strategic way, in a way that we choose. We're not going to be knocked off that process regardless of what, in this particular case, has found its way into the public domain.
And after members of Congress were briefed in a closed-door meeting with intelligence officials,
we all came away with a very strong impression that the administration is taking this very seriously and that the administration has a plan in place.
That was Willie James Inman reporting ahead.
We have been promoting for many years in the United Nations a resolution prohibiting putting any nuclear weapons into outer space. The country which is categorically against it is the United States. At the same time, the United States promotes an approach according to which they want to prohibit putting conventional weapons in outer space. And they cannot answer the question, does this mean that nuclear weapons they would be planning to move to the orbit? So my answer is very clear. We have been championing in the United Nations a legal prohibition of placing any nuclear weapons in outer space.
I wanted to actually start with Donald Trump, the Trump era for U.S.-China relations, beginning with, there's a lot of talk about a golden dome now that the United States is planning to build, a missile defense system that China's foreign ministry spokesperson Mao Ning recently said that this needs to be stopped, that the United States should pull this back and get rid of this idea. We also saw China militarily and just on the diplomatic front become more assertive of late. China has said that it's ready to fight any type of war. It has pushed back hard on the U.S.'s trade war and Trump's trade war. And also we saw with the India-Pakistan conflict, some Chinese weapons, the J-10Cs, be showcased in that conflict. What do you make of this moment right now in U.S.-China relations in the Trump era, given these developments?
Well, I would say for this moment in human history, mankind is faced with a choice, peace or war. And the Golden Dome is a major attempt to weaponize outer space, which is very dangerous. Mankind already had too many wars, too many sufferings on Earth. If you want to weaponize the outer space, you do not know what will be the consequence. So I think China is doing the right thing, calling for stopping the attempted weaponization of space, while every country in the world has legitimate interest in protecting their own sovereignty and territorial integrity, but no one should really blow the situation out of the proportion to weaponize outer space. That's number one. Number two is that China has never been assertive, according to the definition of that word. China has always been very strong, very firm in defending its legitimate rights, including sovereignty and territorial integrity. And if any country is pushing China in the attempted violation of China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, China will fight back. That's not belligerency, I would say. That's really the firm resolution of the Chinese nation under the leadership of the Chinese government and the ruling party. So I think we need to be very careful as to what China stands. China has been a major force for peace and stability in the world, as well as for development, not only for China, but for all the stakeholders in the world.
We saw that President Trump signed an executive order to create an iron dome in space. Can you explain what does that mean?
They're going to start funding research for space-based smaller cruise missiles to then hit nuclear weapons when they go through space. So it takes about 20 minutes for a Russian ICBM to, in theory, make its way to the United States. And a lot of that time is spent flying through space, actually. This future Iron Dome system to really be focused on trying to hit the warhead while it's in space.
Wow. And just to lay some groundwork for everybody listening, what laws govern outer space?
So like the constitution of the outer space is called the Outer Space Treaty. It really laid the foundation for both our U.S. policies, but international policies as well. It has over 100 signatures from the international community. At the heart of it is the concept of free exploration and use of outer space. So nobody can own outer space, nobody can own the moon. And then another key tenet is nobody can place nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction in orbit. There's been a lot of tension though about if you can place just traditional weapons in outer space.
People say, I don't want weapons in space. There's nothing more useless than a space weapon relative to Earth's surface. We can already destroy a city with an intercontinental ballistic missile, and we can aim that. We can aim a missile to any place on Earth, and it'll get there in less than 45 minutes and destroy the whole city with nuclear weapons. We can already do that. There is no advantage to putting nukes in space if that's your objective. Not only that, suppose there's a rogue satellite and it's messing with you. It's beaming energy particles at you and you want to take it out. How are you going to take it out? You're going to destroy it? Oh, now you break it into 1,000,000 pieces. Now each piece is moving 18,000 miles an hour and puts your own satellites at risk. That's the modern equivalent to in the First World War when they said, oh, we have a good idea because we can't shoot them in the trenches. Let's gas them out. So they have the mustard gas. Oops, the wind changed directions. And all of a sudden you become a victim of your own weapon. Wernher von Braun invents rockets. The V2 was the first ballistic missile that leaves our atmosphere, goes into the vacuum of space, and comes back and hits its target. Yeah. He knew, even though this is deputized for warfare, that after the war, if you're going to go into space, you're going to need something like that. We knew that too. We didn't put him on the line at Nuremberg. We got him to birth the Apollo program and design the rocket that would go to the moon, using his expertise that he used to terrorize London with the V2 rocket.
Founder of NASA,
which is this deceptive organization that collects billions of dollars from taxpayers every year, was a man by the name of Wernher von Braun. Now, this Wernher von Braun, he was a German. He was a German engineer who played a prominent role in all aspects of rocketry and space exploration, first in Germany and after World War II in the United States. So it's funny because these engineers came from Germany after World War II, and they came to and received prominent positions in the U.S. government.
Prominent positions.
Now, when Wernher von Braun died, his tombstone, or his the place where they buried him, has a scripture, and that scripture is Psalms chapter 19, from verse 1. And you know what it says? The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. So this guy who's supposedly the head of NASA's space exploration, he knew that the earth is covered with a firmament that is furled. They're deceiving masses.
See how fast it goes? Just like, let's go, oh man. It's good, it's good. Let's go. No way.
You know who Wernher von Braun is?
Yes.
Wernher von Braun was the head of NASA. He's the head of NASA.
Yeah,
he
people don't realize that.
directed all 6 moon missions. And then check this out: when Wernher von Braun died, put up Wernher von Braun's tombstone. He has a Bible verse. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Wernher von Braun. What does it say? Psalm what? 19:1.
19:1.
Watch. I'll put up Psalm 19:1.
Oh, there it is at the bottom.
Now, what does it say?
The firmament
sueth his handiwork. Now the firmament, that's the dome. That's what separates the heavens from earth. That's what Wernher von Braun put on his tombstone. Get the fuck out of here! That's a deathbed confessional right there. That's a death. The guy who faked 6 moon missions put that shit on his tombstone.
I don't know. I mean, the answer to that is I don't know.
The screenplay for Hidden Figures has created a bunch of myths about black people at NASA. The biggest is that there were a lot of black women hired by NASA during the time that the movie takes place. That's actually 100% wrong. The truth is, during the time that that movie is set, NASA didn't hire black women in the South. The civil rights movement terrified the White House, and NASA had an enormous presence in the South. No one in the federal government hired fewer black people than NASA. When the White House told them to do something about it, their scramble got so ridiculous that the agency head said in a meeting that every director had to hire 1 black person in the next 6 months. Anyone, but anybody, didn't mean women. I found a memo in the NASA History Library that proves this. It's from 1963. Every NASA center reported on their outreach to blacks. The southern centers, every time they mentioned women, they were talking about typists and secretaries. Every time. See, in 1963, white men like the ones who ran NASA in the South didn't think black women could do anything besides type. And in that report, all of the southern centers said they couldn't find any black women who could type fast enough, and so they didn't hire any. You know from Hidden Figures that NASA had a job called computer. There were lots of black men doing that job at NASA in the South. It never hired any black women. So what's with the women in that movie?
You have identification on them?
NASA, sir.
NASA?
They weren't hired by NASA. There was an organization called NACA. NACA tested airplanes to see if they were safe. There was a NACA office in Ohio and one in Virginia. The women in that movie worked at NACA in Virginia. In 1958, NASA was founded. The way they did it was they took pieces from other agencies and put them together to form NASA. There was a rocket center in Alabama, a rocket launching center in Florida, and in Virginia and Ohio, there was NACA.
NACA is to become part of a new agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
That is how Katherine Johnson got to do the math for John Glenn.
That's John Glenn.
What do you guys do for NASA?
Calculate your launch and landing site.
And the reason she was the only one was because NASA wouldn't hire a black woman in the South until the mid-1960s. Hollywood creates a lot of myths. One is the white savior. You know, this scene? Totally made up. This never happened. Don't look to the movies to tell you what happened in American history. There are much better places to do that.
You see Mae Jemison. Mae Jemison will be making her first trip in space today.
Why did I want to become an astronaut? It's because I wanted to go into space. It's real simple. I always tell people, you know, I could wait in that Nebraska cornfield with some aluminum foil on my head for E.T. to come find me and take me home, but I thought I had better chances applying to the astronaut program.
Jemison is a medical doctor from Chicago.
I'm Mae Jemison. In 1992, I made world history.
This is CNN Breaking News. Good morning, I'm Ralph Wenke. In just a couple of minutes, the Space Shuttle Endeavour is about to be launched.
I was on that flight, and when it left the Earth, the face of the space program changed.
On board were the first Japanese citizen and the first black female astronaut, Mae Jemison.
I know that there are people who desperately need to know that they, as a young black girl growing up, can do anything that they want.
Growing up in the 1960s, right in the middle of the civil rights movement, my parents made sure I knew African American achievement was not new. Nor did the push for full rights start or end with Martin Luther King Jr. There were others who changed the world. In fact, the early 1900s saw black men like Dr. Daniel Hell Williams perform the first successful open heart surgery, and Matthew Henson reached the North Pole with Admiral Peary. So, of course, my thirst for science and adventure fit right in.
Solid rocket ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Endeavour on America's 50th space shuttle flight.
Alongside me, hidden from history, were others. African-American engineers, rocket scientists, physicists, who helped build the space program of which I was part. They were hidden because in the early years of NASA, you could have counted the black professionals on your fingers.
Lyndon Johnson and Robert Kennedy was looking for a way to help integrate the South, and they saw that the space program was a federally funded program and that the Republican Party was interested in funding this program to beat the Russians to the moon or whatever. So they thought this was a good opportunity to have a federal program would be funded that they could get the high blacks into to integrate that part of the government and also influence the local community.
We think we know black history. Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, the Montgomery bus boycott. But what does any of that have to do with the space program? You'll be surprised.
NASA's role in southern desegregation remains an unwritten and almost forgotten chapter in the history of the space program. Two main rivers, the civil rights movement and the space program, and they merged.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Just that in the vastness of those two separate categories, The contact got lost.
The space program concentrated its resources below the Mason-Dixon line. Cape Canaveral would be the launch center in Florida, the Marshall Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama, Mission Control, the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas, and a number of smaller facilities that were spread around the South.
The South had powerful constituency in Congress.
Lyndon Johnson, for one. At the time, a senator from Texas and majority leader of the U.S. Senate, Johnson was convinced that if the South could be integrated, then Democrats would become the dominant party and a Southern. Lyndon Johnson, for one. At the time, a senator from Texas and majority leader of the U.S. Senate, Johnson was convinced that if the South could be integrated, then Democrats would become the dominant party and a Southerner could be elected president. He embraced early civil rights legislation.
Although some men who would be president on a civil rights platform answered none. On the roll calls on that bill, there were 45. Lyndon Johnson answered all 45.
Johnson was the leader of a group of Southern Democrats who saw the space program as a main chance for their region, a chance to transform the South and, in the process, to make big headway on dealing with the problems of racial injustice in the region.
Was it intentional or deliberate act of social policy to put the agencies in the South? No. But the consequences of their being there are what made the difference. Because of the executive orders and the Civil Rights Acts, NASA as a federal entity was going to keep influencing the South.
Well, when I grew up, everything was segregated. There were white and colored, as they said, water fountains, separate restroom facilities.
2 sets of everything, one for colored and one for the white. And it was almost unsafe to move around the city because of the law enforcement.
Now it's hard times, baby, hard times everywhere I go.
Should they see a group of young black boys moving not in a way that was likened to them, they would come over and arrest you for all kinds of charges.
In my community, it was all black. In fact, I had not talked to a white person in my life until I was made to go into the service. And I walked into this barracks full of all these guys, white guys. I said, good God. I sat on my bunk. I said, how in the world will I able to identify them? They all look alike to me. You know, when you're born in a system like, well, a town like Birmingham, it's all normal to you. You know, we just consider it the way it was.
We had a city park in Huntsville, and there was a black community on 3 sides of the city park. We could not walk through the park on the way to school. Therefore, we had to walk an extra mile just to get to school. When I first started school, I had never seen a book, a magazine, or a newspaper. Never seen one. I was the oldest of 10, never seen a book, a magazine, or a newspaper.
Everybody travel. So as you travel, you go to the station to gas up. It'll say colored and it'll say white. The colored fountain never worked and was always cruddy. The colored bathroom was always out of water. So you had to go down the road someplace and relieve yourself. And this went on for men and women.
And so these are some of the things that we went along with until, not until, but even at the same time, the protests came along with Martin Luther King.
I would fly away from this town, mama, and I'll swear I would never come back.
The main part of our story begins in 1957.
Well, this is Times Square as the great moment approaches. The heart of the nation's largest city preparing to go mad at midnight. A tumultuous farewell to the year 1957.
1957 was just a hellacious year. The civil rights and the space program. They began their parallel courses about 1957.
We don't remember today, but in 1957, Congress, pushed by Lyndon Johnson, passed a civil rights bill.
I think that we have a real duty as public servants to protect the constitutional rights of every American citizen. Now, I have tried to do that by implementing the constitutional rights guaranteed to every citizen with 2 civil rights bills during the 3 Congresses that I have been leader.
That passes in early September. Perfect timing. Little Rock, Arkansas, September 1957. There's an attempt to integrate the schools, particularly Central High.
Units of the National Guard are already on duty on the grounds of Central High School.
September 25th, Eisenhower sends 101st Airborne to Central High.
An extreme situation has been created in Little Rock. This challenge must be met.
So you have Southern Democrat getting civil rights legislation passed that nobody else could do for 80 years. You have a Republican president sending into the South to bring about integration.
If resistance to the federal court order ceases at once.
And 2 weeks later, of course, the Soviets have to get involved, and they launch Sputnik.
It's the biggest story of the year, possibly the #1 story of the century. This launching of the Russian satellite, which brings into the realm of possibility all those wild science fiction stories of interplanetary travel.
There's a great irony in the story of the space program, the South, and civil rights. And that really comes in the era before Sputnik, in the late 1940s and 1950s, because Southern politicians had shown very little interest in rocket science and the potential of a space program.
The people who opposed a crash program to go to the moon were fiscal conservatives in both political parties, and their opposition was basically an opposition to large federal spending for any kind of program.
Well, I'm opposed to the passage of the tax bill for a number of reasons.
And in fact, Albert Thomas, who was the Democratic congressman who represented Houston, Texas.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 10, Roger, Houston, and Gemini 7. Houston, we've had Apollo.
Houston, we're ready for the event.
Thomas waged practically a one-man crusade against the space program. I think part of what made Albert Thomas and several of his colleagues kind of change their mind was Sputnik.
It's very important to understand that you've got a continuum of activities here. In 1945, the United States explodes the atomic bomb, demonstrating our technological virtuosity. In 1949, the Soviet Union does the same thing.
President Truman's dramatic announcement that Russia has created an atomic explosion sends reporters racing for Flushing Meadow, where Russia's...
In 1952, the United States explodes a hydrogen bomb.
3, 2, 1...
In 1953, the Soviet Union does the same thing. In 1954, really, they began the crash effort to build ICBMs. Oh, by the way, the Soviet Union suddenly launches, before the United States in 1957, an orbital satellite. And now they've overtaken us.
Now, sir, what do you think about this achievement of the Russians?
I think it's a remarkable thing. My only regret is that we couldn't get there first.
Tonight, the communists have established a foothold in outer space. It is not very reassuring to be told that next year we will put a better satellite into the air. Perhaps it will even have chrome trim and automatic windshield wipers.
Lyndon Johnson of Texas and Sam Rayburn in the House of Representatives, they understood that this was going to be big and that the space program had potential to bring in a flood of funding, and not only a flood of funding, but a kind of federal investment that would transform the South.
It is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. All our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates. The task is to give 20 million Negroes the same chance as every other American to learn and grow, to work and share in society.
Johnson looked to NASA to help bring the changes he sought. Throughout the 1960s, Southern Democrats like Johnson, many in charge of important congressional committees, pumped billions of dollars into NASA's Southern centers.
Johnson came of age, of course, in the 1930s during the Great Depression, and many people who came of age during the New Deal and the Great Depression had this idea that Southern poverty was at the root of the system of injustice. He also thought that part of the reason that resistance to integration among white Southerners was so fierce was that there was so little to go around in terms of resources.
And money wasn't NASA's only weapon.
Throughout the 1960s, the government relied on the space imagery to sell it, the romance, the pioneering spirit. And in real terms, that transferred into the communities. Because this is the space age, we have to treat people better. Because we are doing this, we need a new society. We need to break up old traditional hiring and segregation habits. Suddenly, the South could step away from because it was the space age, because this was a new society literally being built and shooting off into the stars.
There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet.
When it comes to policy, there are a handful of things that the Kennedy administration is known for. The space program is certainly one of them.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
But honestly, Kennedy didn't talk about space or race, for that matter, very much during the 1960 campaign.
We want a defense second to none. We want a country moving ahead here at home. Last year, the Soviet Union exceeded the economic growth of this country by 3 times. Unless this country moves ahead, unless we continue to grow, unless our defenses are strong, unless we're educating our children, unless we are showing in every way that this country is first, not first but or when or if, but first, and that's what the Democratic Party wants to do in 1960. We ask your help.
They were forced onto his radar by a series of events that happened in the very early weeks of the Kennedy administration, and that really sort of tied race and space.
Kennedy comes into office.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
Promises to get the country moving again, and what do we have? Soviet Union becomes the first nation to put a human into space, and that's followed by the Bay of Pigs.
The Cuban people have not yet spoken their final piece, but there are, from this sobering episode, useful lessons for us all to learn.
He was a failing president. He had to do something.
Redstone missile is the center of world attention as Commander Alan B. Shepard Jr. watches some final preparations before the United States attempts to put its first man into space. As he contacts the base, special cameras record his reactions, something the Russians either failed to accomplish or failed to reveal. Proof was here for all to see that a democracy dares pioneer without secrets, dares defy failure without censorship.
These people are going from town to town and getting off the bus and seeking through mixed groups, men and white women, to force themselves into situations which tend to inflame the local people.
The local African American church has a mass meeting to call attention to this problem. Dr. King is flown in. A mob of thousands surrounds the church and threatens to set the church up. Dr. King phones the Attorney General Robert Kennedy and ask for help. And after a long series of telephone calls with the governor of Alabama, Robert Kennedy sends in the National Guard.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
But I think the time has come for the President of the United States to sign an executive order outlawing or declaring it unconstitutional.
Executive Order 10925 is issued in 1961 by President Kennedy. And that's where all federal contractors have to become equal opportunity, and they have to agree in their contract to a clause that they will not discriminate.
The greatest impact is the part of that executive order that involved the contractors of those federal agencies.
Well, it's significant with NASA because when it's leasing out $2, $3, $4 billion of contracts all around the country, but especially those in the South, those contractors have to go along with it.
It will require some effort on your part. I don't think it's just a question of signing the certificates and indicating a willingness to accept people if they have the talent. I think we probably have to do more than that. We really have to go out and look for them.
I don't think that they really looked in the right place for them. You know, nobody was born a rocket scientist or nobody graduated a rocket scientist. They graduated in math, chemistry, physics, or something like that, and was given the opportunity to come work in the space program. So I don't think NASA went and looked where the people were. Mohawks, Tuskegee, Alabama A&M, Alabama State, that was graduating mathematicians, physics, every day. And you just have to go and show those folks that there is an opportunity for you if you want to come and work at a place like NASA.
In the early 1960s, NASA was gearing up to put a man on the moon. President Kennedy was taking steps to pave the way for African Americans. These were earth-shaking changes on a national scale. But down where Morgan Watson was living, it was hard to see how they applied.
During my elementary and high school years, I picked cotton. At that particular time, the black schools had split sessions, and we were out during the fall to pick cotton. We went during the summers to chop the cotton and during the fall to pick the cotton. As a result, we didn't have football teams or a band. I always had what I call a greasy thumb. I like to tinker with things, take them apart and put them back together. I worked in a hardware store, and the white store owner saw my report card one day and said, you know, you probably would make a good engineer. So I went to the library and started reading on engineers.
I was a child of a large family. There was 13 of us kids, and I was the first male in the family to attend college. My older brothers followed the suit of my father. He was a steel worker, and he would often tell me the difficulty of surviving in the steel mill. And I said, well, I'm going another way. I said, I'm going to get an education, and that's what I did. And so a friend of mine who was one of my classmates had secured a job in Selma, Alabama. I guess you've heard of Selma. He informed me that the institution, that school needed a science teacher, and I had majored in science. I was very happy teaching school, but my wife, she cried every day. She was in Selma. Another friend of mine who we were in school together had gotten a job at the Redstone Arsenal. And I got an application and I left it with my wife to fill out for me. So she filled that thing out, sent it in for me, and I got a hit to come in for an interview. She shouted. She would say, yes, I told you when we got married that I'd follow you to the end of the earth, and damn it, you carried me there. So we got out of there, and that's when I moved back to Huntsville.
When I came back from the service in 1956, I applied for a job in Atlanta, and I applied for a job
in Florida. I had not heard from anybody for about a couple of months. So one day my mama called me and said, you got a telegram from RCA? I said, read it, Mama. They're offering you, I think it was $76 a week. But I didn't even respond. So another 2 months passed. And Mama called again, so you got another telegram? I said, read it, Mama. $96 a month. I said, close enough. I gave notice, a 2 weeks notice, and I headed for Florida.
Looking at NASA as a grand, if accidental, social experiment, it's an open question how much the space agency really did advance race relations in the South.
1964, according to the New York Times, only 11 blacks were part of the 1,500-member NASA workforce at Cape Canaveral at the space facility there. Well, NASA hired 5 more that summer to work, so, technically they had a 50% increase, which they would brag about. But they still only had 16 people.
And things didn't get a lot better as time went on. But still,
40 years, 50 years later, we forget. One black student in a school was an enormous leap forward. One black family in a neighborhood was an enormous leap forward from what had happened before. Did they influence racial change and change in attitudes? Yes, it did. Was it enough? That wasn't its job.
One of the things that the Kennedy administration had in mind was not only technological expertise, but also social progress, and certainly interested in progress and civil rights.
The President of the United States.
At the beginning of the Kennedy administration, NASA was actually dead last within the federal government when it came to hiring black workers. And that started to change after the unrest in Birmingham, which really rattled Attorney General Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and he started twisting the arm of Lyndon Johnson, who started twisting the arm of the head of NASA, who started twisting the arm of the head of the NASA Center in Alabama. Now, the irony of that is that the head of the NASA Center in Alabama was Wernher von Braun, and before Wernher von Braun worked for NASA, his last boss had been
Gather round while I sing you of Wernher von Braun, a man whose allegiance is ruled by expedience. Call him a he won't even frown. Schmatzi, says Wernher von Braun.
But von Braun knew how to follow orders, and so in 1963 he met with the presidents of 12 HBCUs, and a few weeks later he opened the NASA Center's college co-op program to black students for the first time.
Equal employment opportunity in the federal government is the cornerstone of our federal merit system. However, it was not until 1961, after the issuance of several orders barring discrimination in the federal government, that President John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 10-925, establishing a new program of equal employment opportunity in the federal service.
It was very difficult for me as a boy picking cotton in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade to even visualize going to NASA. I knew what NASA was, and I knew about President Kennedy's idea of putting a man on the moon, but to think that I could work there.
As federal employees, you should be mindful that the executive order, like the Civil Service Act, carries with it a strong injunction against discriminatory acts in the federal service.
We were all students at Southern University in either our junior or senior year, and we were asked by the dean of the College of Engineering if we would be willing to take a job assignment in NASA. They were establishing a new cooperative education program whereby we would be in school one semester and work at NASA in Huntsville for the other semester.
If we are to extend man's boundary to the outer reaches of the universe, it is imperative that we also resolve man's relationship with man on this earth.
Today, I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate that from this cradle of the this very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, that today we sound the drum for freedom, as have our generation of forebears before us done time and again down through history.
Alabama was not a very good place if you didn't know your way around, shall we say, in the 60s.
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say now, tomorrow, and forever.
I started at NASA in the spring semester of 1964. There were no apartments, hotels, or anything that would allow us to live there. Everything was segregated. So they found us rooms with people in the community. So it was quite an experience. It was like being in an extended family. We got very close to the people. They had children themselves, but they would rent a room or two in their house for us to live.
As a student, I was working in the Quality Assurance Laboratory. Quality Assurance was responsible for testing all of the components on a daily basis for temperature, pressure, how they would react in space, and so forth. I went into the propulsion and vehicle engineering. This is where the test of the engine actually took place, all the way from the paper test, the paper design, all the way to static firing.
To perform our nation's most ambitious exploration of this decade, a manned exploration of the moon, the Saturn V space vehicle is under development by NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the country's industrial might.
Static firing, you get an actual chance to see how the engine would perform in the Earth's atmosphere and wherever it was assigned to work. At the time, they were done right on the site at the Marshall Space Flight Center, out at the back, way in the back, and it was a sight to see. You know, the engine is the rocket is tied down, and the engines are firing, and it's smoking. Oh yeah, it's quite exciting. Yeah, quite an experience. A lot of noise too.
Oh, I'm sure.
In addition to those 11 African-American technicians at Cape Canaveral, there were 30 in Houston out of a workforce of nearly 5,000. To be fair, NASA, and especially the Marshall Space Flight Center, did try to hire black workers, but it said it couldn't find them.
Von Braun made a sincere effort to try to hire more African Americans, but nonetheless, his response really was that there were problems in trying to do so here, in part because when NASA and Marshall in particular tried to recruit in the North, it was very hard, given Alabama's reputation, to recruit African Americans to come to Huntsville.
They didn't want to because of the image Governor Wallace had depicted. Very few people, black and white, neither one wanted to come to Alabama.
You think that the situation that existed on this side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Sunday was a riot? Standing in a line, waiting and asking to have a word with your troopers, sir.
Mr. Benton, and I want to say again that my orders have always been to use a minimum amount of force. No force if necessary. For goodness sakes, don't let anybody get hurt. I've said that over and over and over. That's all.
Was the amount of force used last Sunday the minimum required?
Was it the minimum required? That matter at the present time, as a result of the charges of is under investigation, but I'm not going to be stampeded or blackjacked, as Mr. Johnson said, into making any accusations against the police because some outside agitators themselves have accused us of police.
The people on the buses. I called up and talked to a fella. He says, "Do what? Coming south? Are you crazy?" I went on a recruiting trip for NASA, and I found quite a few. And some came and left the next day.
And Morgan Watson says, you also can't discount the North-South cultural divide.
If you're raised in an integrated society in Chicago or New York or wherever, coming to the South was like going to a battleground. You'd just as soon go to Vietnam and die on foreign soil rather than die in America.
And there's maybe another less recognized problem that contributed to the tiny size of NASA's African American Science and Engineering Corps. Dr. Frank Crosley was one of the Navy's first black commissioned officers. He spent most of his career working in aerospace.
There's an absence of role models as close relatives of African Americans in fields other than chemistry. When a young person has a close relative who is in an engineering field
They feel comfortable in entering that field because if Uncle Harry can do that, then certainly I can do it.
The work of Dr. Carver is well known. While at Tuskegee, he has contributed much to the science of nutrition.
George Washington Carver, because of his national reputation, provided a role model in the area of chemistry, and to the best of my knowledge, all of the black colleges offered majors in chemistry.
But Dr. Crossley says few offered degrees in engineering, and engineers were what NASA was looking for.
When I have attended national and international meetings in my field, which is metallurgical engineering, I think I've encountered only 2 African Americans at such meetings over the years.
African American college students in the South were so obstructed by the racism in their communities that they didn't even think about the space program.
They wanted to go north because they thought that's where the opportunities were. In fact, one of my guys that grew up with me, he went to Tuskegee, and he was a brilliant guy. And he graduated and went to work for IBM up in Rochester, New York. And my thinking, and probably the thinking of a lot of other people at that time, was if a guy this brilliant can't get a job in the South, I certainly can't, so I need to be looking to go somewhere to work in the North also. And I don't know how well he was recruited to go work for NASA, but he certainly was the person that had the background and capabilities that NASA needed.
Job options for blacks in the late 50s and early 60s, especially in the South, were unmercifully restricted by custom and in some cases by law.
The basic job that you can get back then was janitorial. If you could cook, you could cook.
If you stayed in the South and you went to college, the best you could be would be a teacher.
Janitor, concrete work, but you couldn't be the boss.
My great-grandfather was a railroad man or a farmer, and most of that was what we call sharecropper or whatever. Sharecropper, yes.
The prospects were so dim for black engineers in the South that Frank Crossley says young African Americans planning careers in that field always had to have a plan B.
Well, I decided I would study engineering, and if I couldn't get a job as an engineer, I would either go to Canada or Mexico. Canada had the virtue of speaking English, and Mexico had the virtue of having colored people.
Another problem was rooted in NASA's outreach effort.
They sent out primarily white recruiters. It would be a difficult problem for black recruiters to talk to a person coming back to Huntsville. They send out white recruiters, and they end up with basically zero.
So you're sending a white recruiter from basically a white agency in this case into a black college to convince black men that they should move to Florida or they should stay in Alabama, possibly even go to Mississippi. Nobody talked to them.
So I went up to University of Arkansas and worked on mathematics and what we call applied mathematics. Then while I was there, NASA came through recruiting. And you probably run into Charles Smoot. Smoot was up there, and I had never met him before, and he was recruiting, and he was telling me about he had Marshall Space Flight Center at that time. And then I asked Smoot, I said, what is it like down in Alabama? Now, we heard about your governor and all those people, you know. He said, well, it's going to be in Huntsville, and about 100 miles north of Birmingham. It's a little bit different. I said, well, how much different, you know? Then I went back and told my wife, I said, you want to go to Alabama? She said, no, I don't want to go to Alabama. I said, well, that's what I got offered, to go down to Huntsville, Alabama. And she said, you sure you want to go? I said, let's give it a try.
So Huntsville wasn't the worst of NASA's southern installations. No, to find that, you'd have to look in the place you'd least expect.
Let's look at Florida, that most southern projection of the USA, which has been variously known as the Peninsula State, the Sunshine State, and even the Mermaid State. For the uninitiated, the mere mention of the word Florida calls up a kaleidoscopic mental picture of flamingos and alligators, boating, bathing beauties, and bottles of suntan oil.
Florida has this highly cultivated image as tourist paradise, with bathing beauties and postcards of alligators and wish you were here. But a part of Florida history that really has never been publicized is its record of lynchings. Florida had the highest per capita rate of lynching of any southern state, which means you were more likely to get lynched if you were a black person living in Florida than any other southern state.
Boating, fishing and swimming, golf, tennis, riding, Florida's famous vacation towns provide them all.
Today, people think of Central Florida, and the two things that come to mind are Disney World and Cape Canaveral. But what shocked me was to find out just how powerful the Klan was in Central Florida.
In fact, the part of Florida where the Klan was strongest was in the area surrounding Cape Canaveral.
Going back to the 20s, they used to have Klan parades. They had a junior Klan for young people. The Klan basically ran those counties, particularly Orange County, the home today of Orlando and Disney World. The sheriff of Orange County was a known Klansman. They had elected officials, city commissioners, county commissioners, local businessmen joined the Klan almost like joining the Rotary Club. In fact, one local businessman told the FBI that probably 75-80% of all businessmen belong to the Klan.
Florida, orange blossom of the South.
Many in the federal government hoped that by bringing jobs into Florida, they would tone down this kind of thing. They also hoped that the extra jobs that came with NASA's arrival in Florida would help the black community. But near Cape Canaveral itself, the arrival of the space program actually had the opposite effect at first. Rockets had been launched from Cape Canaveral since 1950. When the space race began, the government bought up much of the rest of the land around the old missile base, creating what is now called Kennedy Space Center. And in doing so, a flourishing African American community was wiped out.
There was a lot of history there, and there was a lot of black people doing things that I don't see written anywhere.
It turns out the place where I and the other astronauts left the Earth for space was once an all-black community called Allenhurst.
It was a segment between Titusville and Oak Hill. Back then, blacks had a lot of property over there. There was a lot of industry over there.
There were orange groves run by African Americans. There was a thriving black-owned fish processing industry. The area had its own black entrepreneurs. Theodis Ray says NASA's arrival ended all of that.
When the government came in and bought all this land, they bought the 80,000 acres, it wiped us out. I mean, you had these fishermen, that was their livelihood. Most of them didn't have education, and all they did was fish. After the NASA come in and bought all that property, then I started working out there as a janitor. And I worked there for many years until I got drafted into the Marine Corps. Come out of the Marine Corps, I went back on the Space Center, but not as a janitor. Even though they offered me the job back, but I was too evil to take that job. So I left there, and I signed up with a company out of Texas, LTV. It was a technical company. I went from there from one contract to another into logistics.
As a federal agency, NASA couldn't discriminate. But there's plenty to suggest that, even with all the protections in place, NASA in the South was still in the South. When it came to a fight between federal rules and local custom, NASA retiree Clyde Foster is emphatic who won.
Local custom.
That custom hit Julius Montgomery right in the face when he showed up for his first day at work.
It's all used to being around white guys because I've been working with white guys all my life. I was always the only one. And where I went, I was the only one. When I came back from the service in 1956, went to 6-week schools because they had, space program had altogether different type skills, timing, radar, telemetry, and we were trained. And that's how we were able to start work at RCA. In 1956, I worked in the development lab, and, I was a strange person coming into an all-white building, all white. And the first day I was there, nobody would shake my hand. I got to the last fellow, he's a Navy chief, and he had retired, and he decided to work for RCA. So he was the last one I got to. I said, how are you? I'm Julius Montgomery. And, boy, you don't talk to a white man like that. I said, forgive me, oh great white bastard. I really did say that. I don't know why I said that, but but I did. And he laughed, I laughed, and then we shook hands. But okay, now that later on, I've been there for a while, a few more guys did shake my hands. And so I said, look, I'm part of the educational program to train you guys to act like people. You've been acting like rednecks all your life. You need training, retraining.
I found a memo when I was doing research in the NASA history files that proves that the Southern Centers didn't hire black women to do anything other than secretarial work. It was a report where every single one of the centers talked about their outreach to blacks in 1963, and with the Southern Centers, every time they mentioned women, they talked about typists and secretaries. So how does that square with the story in Hidden Figures?
You have identification on them?
NASA, sir.
NASA? I had no idea they hired.
There are quite a few women working in the space program.
Least I can do is give y'all an escort.
Well, the women in Hidden Figures weren't hired by NASA. There was an organization called NACA, or it's sometimes called NACA. NACA tested airplanes to see if they were safe. There was a NACA office in Ohio and one in Virginia, which is where all those women worked. So in 1958,
members of the NACA staff, this is my first opportunity to greet you as Deputy Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It is a very great pleasure to introduce the Administrator of NASA, Dr. T. Keith Glennon.
Thank you, Hugh. First, let me say that I have long been familiar with NACA's traditions and accomplishments. One of the real incentives underlying my acceptance of this job as NASA's first administrator was the knowledge that NACA would be the first and most substantial unit to be absorbed into NASA.
NACA became part of NASA.
As of the close of business on Tuesday, September the 30th, the shift from NACA to NASA will become official.
That is how Katherine Johnson got to do the math for John Glenn.
What do you guys do for NASA?
Calculate your launch and landing site.
And the reason why she was the only black woman doing that kind of work is because NASA didn't hire another black woman in the South to do math until the mid-1960s.
See, I worked in the OSO lab when I signed on with NASA, and there was a black woman in the head office, Dorothy Holloway, who was a receptionist. And she just answered the telephone. That's all she did.
But he said, you fill out the application, I bring it to you, and I take it out to personnel, see what happens. Well, I did. And they responded and said I was highly qualified, but they didn't have any vacancies. Well, I applied again, same thing, applied 3 times, same answer. I didn't understand that. How can you be qualified and they keep not having a vacancy for you? And I knew they were looking for co-ops.
I found a memo when I was doing research in the NASA history files that proves that the Southern Centers didn't hire women to do anything other than secretarial work. It was a report where every single one of the centers talked about their outreach to blacks in 1963, and with the Southern centers, every time they mentioned women, they talked about typists and secretaries. So how does that square with the story in Hidden Figures?
You have identification on them?
NASA, sir.
NASA? I had no idea they hired.
There are quite a few women working in the space program.
Least I can do is give y'all an escort.
Well, the women in Hidden Figures weren't hired by NASA. There was an organization called NACA, or it's sometimes called NACA. NACA tested airplanes to see if they were safe. There was a NACA office in Ohio and one in Virginia, which is where all those women worked. So in 1958...
Members of the NACA staff, this is my first opportunity to greet you as Deputy Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It is a very great pleasure to introduce the Administrator of NASA, Dr. T. Keith Glennon.
Thank you, Hugh. First, let me say that I have long been familiar with NACA's traditions and accomplishments. One of the real incentives underlying my acceptance of this job as NASA's first administrator was the knowledge that NACA would be the first and most substantial unit to be absorbed into NASA.
NACA became part of NASA.
As of the close of business on Tuesday, September the 30th, the shift from NACA to NASA will become official.
That is how Katherine Johnson got to do the math for John Glenn.
What do you guys do for NASA?
Calculate your launch and landing site.
And the reason why she was the only woman doing that kind of work is because NASA didn't hire another woman in the South to do math until the mid-1960s.
See, I worked in the Aeroastronaut lab when I signed on with NASA, and there was a black woman in the head office, Dorothy Holloway, who was a receptionist, and she just answered the telephone. That's all she did.
But he said, you fill out the application, I bring it to you, and I take it out to personnel, see what happens. Well, I did. And they responded and said I was highly qualified, but they didn't have any vacancies. Well, I applied again, same thing, applied 3 times, same answer. I didn't understand that. How can you be qualified and they keep not having a vacancy for you? And I knew they were looking for co-ops. My mother was a domestic. She worked for some very influential people over in Gunnersville, like Art Sanderson's wife. And when my mother told them, I was having trouble getting on after I graduated. And she said, tell her to go over and talk to Art because I know that they are looking for And so I went over there and I talked to Art. Art set me up some interviews. First interview didn't go too well because he didn't want to talk about anything but my music. I see you take music. Do you sing? Can you sing? And after a few questions like that, I just said, I don't understand. That's not what I'm interviewing for. So he got a little irritated and said, you think I'm going to hire you? Got up and left. So I got up and went to Art and told him what happened. So he set me up another interview with Bob Smith, who was a meteorologist. A great man, best boss you could probably ever have. He hired me.
These were the years when Morgan Watson first arrived at Marshall Space Flight Center, where he and his compatriots were the first black engineers.
At the time we were there were no black professionals at all. I remember some groundskeepers and janitors, but as far as professionals, there wasn't none. So we wore our ties and shirts every day to sort of stand out. And we were sources of curiosity by everybody. The people that were there wanted to know who we were and where we came from.
The other blacks who were at Marshall mostly worked in lower-paying jobs. They were actually qualified to do much more sophisticated and higher paying work. But as retired NASA Deputy Administrator Jim Jennings explains,
when they first graduate from school with full degrees in the technical areas, math, chemistry, they were actually brought into the government as technicians. They weren't brought in as full professionals.
In order to advance their careers, they had to take classes, advanced training. NASA offered the classes, but always off the base, in a hotel or at the White University. This being the South.
We weren't allowed in public facilities. We were not allowed to go to the motels and hotels or any other public place.
This particular insult started to eat at Clyde.
You feel like you are a piece of ready to explode. The only thing it takes was but a little fire. Cigarette butt.
Elsewhere in the South, people were getting fired up, but Clyde decided it wasn't enough just to get mad. He took action. He worked his way up the chain, and doggedly and with persistence, he convinced NASA to hold a second, separate but equal set of training courses at Alabama A&M, the all-black college in Huntsville.
I was able to go out to Alabama A&M and spent 2 years in developing the first computer sciences degree in the state of Alabama.
For the first time, thanks to Clyde Foster, black NASA employees could advance. But still, NASA's impact went beyond that. NASA was able to help establish a black middle class, creating families with enough resources that they could start building better neighborhoods. As an example, Morgan Watson remembers an all-black enclave called Triana outside the gates of the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama.
It was an all-black town with outdoor toilets, and civilization hadn't quite made it there yet. That was the old South.
Clyde Foster lived in Triana.
And we had terrible conditions here. No public water system, no lights, no paved streets. It was terrible. And I said, now we're going to the moon, like we could have some of the basic needs for the community here.
His wife told him that she had heard from friends that the neighborhood had once been a city.
I said, you out of your mind, girl. What are you talking about? It's a city. I don't see any, not a stoplight, not a stop sign.
But Foster was intrigued, and he decided to look into it.
I told the girl to put on a hat and shoes. We're going to go down to Montgomery, Alabama. I went to the archives in the state of Alabama and discovered that this had been a municipality and never been dissolved.
The area had, in fact, been incorporated in 1819.
And I said, holy Michael.
Clyde had been trying unsuccessfully to get the area purified water. He had been turned down by the state and by the USDA.
When I found out this was a town, I said the easiest way to do is let's incorporate the town. And town will now be eligible for some grants that you don't have to pay back. And I went back to Alabama A&M and got with some of the professors over there. And I asked him to advise me how could we reestablish that charter.
They applied to a judge to get the charter reinstated. The judge agreed. Clyde got himself elected mayor of Triana, and then the action really got started.
If you remember that photograph I sent to you with the original town of council of Triana, we later on was able to build a new city hall, $750,000. But it was a complex of many activities. We had an administrative office, fire department in there, a jailhouse, air conditioning, daycare, gymnasium.
He appointed a black sheriff. The people elected a black city council. All of this set off a chain reaction in other small black communities around Alabama.
Challenge with the job that we were trying to do is to get a man on the moon. I didn't fear anything that I couldn't do. It gave me that desire to do more. I said, if now we can do this in space, we certainly can do it here.
Blacks working at NASA were breaking down barriers in Florida too. A white scientist named Jerry Cooper had decided to start a technical school. When the college was first starting, the plan was to hold classes in a county high school until they could get their own building. Julius Montgomery signed up to be one of the school's first students, and on his application, he wrote down that he got his undergraduate degree from Tuskegee Institute. When county school officials saw that, they called Cooper in for a meeting.
He was told, "I'm sorry, but this fellow here is from Tuskegee, so he must be black. He cannot come to this classroom." So shortly after, I was called by the manager, Julius Montgomery, "Come to the office, please."
The manager introduced Julius Montgomery to Jerry Cooper.
I said, "Yes, Dr. Cooper, what can I do for you?" He said, "Well, I need your help." Well, the help he needed was to take my name off that list so he can start his new college.
In a remarkable act of absolute selflessness, Julius agreed.
For the better good of everybody, I took my name off the list, and that's how I got to know Dr. Cooper. So we became friends. He said, "As soon as I get my own buildings, you are welcome." And that was true, he did.
Not only that, since 2006, the school, now called Florida Institute of Technology, has presented the Julius Montgomery Pioneer Award for Community Leadership. Daring and commendable as these moves on race might be, there was plenty of room to fault NASA for its record on race. But Morgan Watson credits NASA with ending the flight of the black middle class from the South.
The space program certainly helped change the South. Not only NASA, but the whole federal government laid the groundwork from the military on for blacks to be integrated into the workplace.
He says because NASA represented the future, because NASA was a place where only the best and the brightest worked, because it took the time and trouble to find a place for people like him who grew up chopping cotton in the old South to build spaceships to go to the moon, NASA did fulfill the hopes of those who saw it as a way to break down America's firm barriers.
By showing that there were black professionals who could do that, you proved the fact that people were available that could do it. It helped to break the walls down. It helped change people's perception of black people in the South.
And once the walls came down, people could begin to treat each other not as black and white, but as co-workers. Julius Montgomery, who couldn't get that man to shake his hand the first day at work, he kept on pushing, and in the end, they actually became friends.
And in fact, when he left, he gave me a gift, little white dog. White dog. And we call him Whitey.
When the shuttle Endeavour blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center, it landed in the record books several times over.
So here we are back, the sounds of my shuttle flight. As an astronaut training at Marshall Space Center in Huntsville, I used to comment on the confluence of events that brought me here. Born at the beginning of the space race and the modern-day civil rights movement in Decatur, Alabama, right next door to Huntsville. And oh yeah, my father was a roofer on the construction of the Redstone Arsenal. Instinctively, I knew that without having any of those events, my journey into space might not have happened. Not because I wouldn't have had the potential, skills, education, and drive for exploration. Many black American women did before me. But because the country had to finally arrive at the right place to recognize and take advantage of the talent of all of its citizens. NASA and its contractors have African American, Hispanic, and Asian engineers, scientists, technicians, flight surgeons, and other personnel. And of course, astronauts. At centers not just in the South, but around the nation. But there's still more work to do, and the tale continues.